Alrighty. Well, hello. Thank you for attending today's session. Today, I'm going to be talking about need for speed, modern SIEM with real-time detection and automation. My name is Ken Westin. I am field CISO here at Panther. You might wonder, what is a field CISO? It's sort of a fancy name for sort of a solutions engineer that's out in the field. I work very closely with other security leaders, our customers, ensuring that they're actually getting value out of our product, learning more about requirements, and trying to make our product better. And so I have spent a lot of time in the SIEM world. I actually spent about 4 years at Splunk, where I was one of the first security specialists. I then went to Elastic, where I was there for almost 3 years, where I led security strategy and competitive intelligence. So I'm pretty familiar with the SIEM space, and I've been with Panther for almost over a year now, and I've really enjoyed it. I've been learning quite a bit, particularly around sort of how SIEM requirements have changed over the last few years, particularly since I started selling SIEM. So I'm really excited about this particular session because it allows me to kind of highlight some of the trends that I'm seeing out in the marketplace with our prospects and customers and sort of the industry in general. So kind of to lay the ground here, I always like to start with this slide. I know it's a bit of an eye chart, but I like to sort of think about, where we started. When we start talking about SIEM is actually old enough to drink. It's 2 decades old. It started back with the first SIEM, which was ArcSight at the time. And it was actually 2 different tools that were sort of merged together. You had SIEM, which was security information management, which dealt more with log aggregation and really compliance use cases. And then you had security event management, which really dealt more with the sort of the actual events as we start to bring in some of these alerts. And how do you do that? How do you do correlating firewall alerts with things that are happening on the endpoint, maybe with like a Windows log, for example. And it was really great. And it was then around 2006, I think it was Gartner that sort of merged the two together, and that's where we actually had the first SIEM Magic Quadrant. And you started seeing that there were a lot of other SIEM vendors that started coming onto into the market. You saw that originally the SIEMs were really dealing with on-prem networks and data centers. And then around 2006, that's where we saw this migration to cloud when this sort of boutique company that was selling books decided to get into the web hosting business, and really the cloud was born. Shortly thereafter, we had Google that came on with GCP, and now we also have Microsoft Azure. And so with that, we've also seen this sort of migration as well to the cloud. And it's really changed the requirements of SIEM dramatically. It started with more people pushing workloads into the cloud, more maybe applications and SaaS applications that they may be using that were leveraging cloud resources. But then we also started seeing more organizations actually move their application infrastructure into the cloud. I've also seen that, when I was selling in 2015 to SIEM, I was selling to IT departments that were oftentimes they're selling widgets or services, things like that. They weren't necessarily technology companies themselves. What I've seen recently is that now pretty much every company is a cloud company. Every company is offering some sort of service in the cloud. So really every company is a tech company. I'm also seeing there's a lot heavier DevOps focus, a lot more automation that needs to occur as well. And we've also started to see that the amount of data that we're actually trying to ingest from these different platforms has also increased exponentially. So it's really important to sort of think about, where did we start about 2 decades ago, if some I might be dating myself here, and to where we are now, where the requirements for SIEM have changed dramatically. And I'm even seeing situations where you may have multiple SIEMs. You may actually have a cloud SIEM like Panther that really does well at processing high volume, high velocity log sources. And you may have a legacy SIEM that you have, more for your firewalls and your traditional data sources for those on-prem networks. So how can you get those 2 tools to work together? And also finding that really a critical component of this is we need to be able to respond to threats faster. And we can do that by leveraging automation. We've seen that with the implementation of SOAR platforms that sort of hang on or they integrate with various SIEMs, as well as sort of UBA tools and things like that. So I'm going to kind of walk through what I believe is sort of the key elements that we want to focus on and how we can actually look at increasing speed of our SIEM. And it's not always about just detection, which is great. Being able to do real-time detection, I think, is critically important, particularly when you're looking at sort of AppSec and cloud infrastructure, where if something goes wrong, you need to respond to it immediately. But also, how can we actually reduce the amount of time it takes for us to manage the infrastructure? How can we reduce the amount of work that our analysts are having to do so they can focus on those real life mitigating those threats? So sort of thinking about modern areas that we can actually improve, I kind of organize this into 4 different areas. I look at ingest, I look at parsing and storage, I look at detection, and then also look at response. One thing I've really started to realize is how important it is for SIEMs to actually work within the existing security ecosystem. I think this whole thing of trying to have one vendor, one application, it doesn't meet the customer where they are. It provides, makes things inflexible. I think organizations should be able to choose best of breed or best tools that fit their particular infrastructure. And I really find that every organization truly is unique in how they're implementing their SIEM. I find that, they may have different levels of application logic and things like that they need to be able to manage. And not everyone's going to be a DevOps house. They may not all have engineers, so we need to be able to fulfill all those different requirements. But when we start with ingest, we need to be able to quickly ingest new data sources. The days of trying to monkey around with different agents and different ways of manipulating that data are pretty much over. There's standardized methodologies that we can actually use. Most cloud providers and SaaS applications provide mechanisms to offload those logs. Microsoft is coming with that now too. Like you no longer have to just have E5 license to get access to some of those Microsoft logs. Now you can also get that with some of the lower tiers as well, which is great. I'm hoping that more logs are free. I believe that all logs want to be free. I'm looking at you, GitHub. I'm hoping that at some point you don't require the enterprise license to be able to export logs. I think that's not very good for your customers. We also want to be able to leverage APIs and different data transport mechanisms to get the data in. Not everyone is going to be doing all cloud all the time. Sometimes we also need to be able to bring in on-prem log sources or leverage a hybrid as well. And then also having HTTP webhooks, again, integrating with other tools, being able to, maybe if you have a custom log or application, being able to just send HTTP requests to ingest that data. We actually just recently launched that feature as well. So you can actually find new creative ways to actually ingest data into your SIEM. We also want to be able to parse and normalize that data. So we want to be able to parse pretty much any data, any format. We need to normalize that for search. We want to automate the data management process. I'll talk a little bit about that, how some of the challenges with the legacy SIEMs are with the data infrastructure and the number of full-time employees you have to manage that. Really, that's kind of the old way of thinking. Finding a lot of newer SIEMs, such as Panther, we're able to leverage our security data lake, where we sort of automate a lot of those processes so you don't have to monkey with hot, warm, and cold buckets. Also being able to search that data. The data retention requirements are becoming much more important for organizations. It used to be useful for compliance use cases, but what I'm finding is that there's a lot of reasons why we want to be able to look back retroactively. And a lot of SIEMs, you're lucky if you get 30, 60, 90 days. And that's where it gets incredibly expensive for a lot of these organizations, just the way that they're architecting some of their back-end data storage. And so having to search a actually search, which is really great for investigations. I found it to be incredibly helpful. So that along with that, we can also be able to do threat hunting, be able to deep dive into our investigations, maybe provide additional context around an alert that we have. That's going to be critically important, as well as leveraging safe searches. With us, we actually have Python where we write our real-time detections. But we also maybe want to be able to search across a wider aperture of time across a lot more log sources. And that's where we can also leverage, again, a security data lake to be able to help us with that. Then again, when it comes to detection, it's becoming important to be able to apply real-time detections. Now, a lot of SIEM vendors may say, yeah, it's real-time, but it's really not, because there has to be a process where they have to get that data indexed, and then they're actually running these sort of safe searches. So there can be a lot of latency, not just on the time where it takes the logs to get into that system, but also whatever the interval is for when it's going to run that safe search. So with Panther, we actually apply our detections as that data flows into the environment. We leverage detection as code, which also reduces the amount of time and increases efficiency of how we're writing those detections. There's a lot of methodologies that we can have, maybe leveraging GitHub Actions to establish the security workflow, for example, for that. Have a senior analyst review junior analyst detections before it gets deployed into production, be able to roll that back, as well as push out those detections very rapidly, and even integrated with a CI/CD pipeline if that's something that you're leveraging as well. So again, that's where we can start to leverage automation to really start to speed up the process of creating the detections as well as pushing those out. And then also, again, be able to have those workflows, and then also the safe searches, as I discussed before. And then also, we want to be able to have on our response, we want to be able to enrich the data as well. So, integrating with threat intelligence feeds or providing additional context around it. That's something that's really incredibly powerful, and something that we want to be able to have in our SIEM. The more we can do that, we're able to take a lot of work off of the analyst. They don't have to go out and do a bunch of searches. The more context we can provide around alert to make it actionable, that we're going to be able to speed up that time again to response and remediating that particular threat. Integrating with severity and risk scores is also really helpful. We can modify severity depending on different parameters. Being able to write those detections in Python as well makes that very easy. If you're interested in this too, we also have hands-on workshops. There is a link at the end of this presentation, but it's just in our workshops page where we actually will walk you through in 2 hours how to write detections in Python, even talk about some more of these different features as well. We can also integrate with SOAR. A really great partner of ours is Tynes. I'll talk a little bit about them a little bit later on, and how we can actually feed those alerts to trigger various playbooks as well to again reduce the amount of time the analyst has to spend on that, and then they can also, again, increase the time that we actually respond to those particular threats, are particularly things that we know with a high confidence that, hey, if this alert has this critical severity, we have a high confidence in this, we need to automate some sort of a response. You can do that through SOAR platforms. We also have a custom webhook, and I'll talk about that as well later. And then also be able to tie in that with our incident response processes. And this is something that, again, every organization might work differently. With us, we can integrate with Jira, other ticketing systems if you don't want to leverage the Panther UI for that. Or you can also, send that off to a number of other different tools, custom webhooks, and things like that. So with Panther, what we do, we really do focus on speed. We really want to be able to look at threats as they're coming in. We can actually write very robust detections leveraging the Python scripting language, right? So we don't have to rely on a proprietary query language. It's also incredibly fast. We leverage AWS Lambda, and those can get spun up depending on the volume automatically. So again, you don't have to do any sort of configuration. Your security team can focus on mitigating the threats, not managing the tools themselves. We also can scale. We're pretty much unlimited in how we can scale, again, leveraging our security data lake. We use Snowflake as our backend, which is highly performant, very efficient, and can basically scale to infinite volumes of data. I have to look at the record, but we have customers that are ingesting petabytes of data per month, right? So the scale is no longer really an issue. And we also don't have to monkey with any of that sort of back-end data architecture, which again frees up our analysts to be able to focus on those threats. And again, the power of it is leveraging Python. Again, you don't have to learn a proprietary query language. I think most people in security and IT know Python, or it's very easy to learn. If you don't know Python, or you're not comfortable with it for writing detections, again, sign up for one of our workshops. More than happy to walk you through that. We actually assume that you don't have any Python experience at all. I've been able to get, even high school students writing detections in Python, and they actually have a lot of fun with it. So hope you can join us with those workshops. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the data ingest. So one thing with us, we have almost 100 different integrations where we actually can very easily ingest data. There's actually on our website, you can go into our integrations and it'll show all the different integrations that we have. And if there isn't one, you can very easily create your own. We actually have a sort of an inferred schema. You can just draw a log file. It'll try to infer a schema, and then you can ingest, any sort of custom log source that you're trying to ingest. I actually looked at our top log sources, and that was like number 3 or 4, I think, was a custom log source, because a lot of our customers have custom applications. And so they have their custom schemas, and this allows them very easily to basically have a SIEM for their application, which is really great. And then you can also send a custom webhook to actually ping that application, so you can actually have it monitoring the application and sending additional context around those alerts into the app as well. So that can be incredibly powerful for a lot of organizations. Again, we can bring in custom log formats. We can look at how we can leverage our new webhook as well for ingesting that data. Again, you don't have to have common transports or API keys. Depending on the type of log source or whatever, you can just send it directly as an HTTP request, and it'll get ingested and parsed the same as any other log format. So we also want to be able to look at how we can parse and normalize the storage. So that's a nice thing is, you can bring in all these different logs and all these different formats. What we're able to do is we actually parse and normalize that into JSON, which then gets stored in the security data lake. This methodology is just incredibly efficient. It's very fast for us to then search as well in JSON. So think about all the advantages of, again, having all of your data in one place and have it searchable within milliseconds. I've started running some very complex queries that would, sometimes I call them my coffee break queries, where I would usually have to run a search, go get a cup of coffee, come back and get my results. Oh, that's not what I did. Now I have to go back and refine my SPL, and then I have to run the search again. That takes a lot of time again. So leveraging like a more efficient security data lake, such as Snowflake that we use, we're able to get those results back much faster. And again, we can do that at massive scale. We're talking petabytes of data. Being able to search that again across an entire year of time, it's almost like superhuman in many respects, and how fast it can actually be. So sort of thinking about how some of the legacy approaches have been to managing data infrastructure. If you're working with some of these legacy SIEMs, they require you to sort of set up these different buckets. And with these different buckets, they have different hardware profiles. So in your hot, you may have to have SSD. It's much more expensive, much more resource intensive. That's where you're actually not only searching the data, but also indexing it. And then you may have roll that data off into a warm bucket, where you may have still some SSDs, which might be a little bit expensive. Or if you have regular hard drives, then you start to have to make these questions with regards to performance. You make sacrifices. And then you get into cold, where you definitely have regular hard drives, and it can take a lot of time if you're trying to search anything past 90 days. Just be prepared for those really long queries. And then frozen, where it's either not searchable at all, or it's incredibly low performance when you're running those searches. So again, when you're sort of looking at these legacy SIEM approaches, you're having to make these sacrifices. And also, if you look at this, they'll say, oh yeah, it'll scale vertically. Well, oftentimes when you go back, when you look at your indexers, you have to actually restructure all of that. You may want to put the logs that have a high throughput into different indexers versus ones that don't have as much, like maybe like a threat intel resource, things like that. And that's not something they tell you, but oftentimes when you start to increase the volume of data, you're having to go back and re-architect your entire solution. And that usually requires full-time employees. One of the SIEM vendors, I won't say which one, I actually found it, where they actually have an entire page on how to staff the management of their tool, right? So if you think about that, if you hire security analysts and their job is to go out and find threats, do you really want them to spend half their day or all of their time just managing that particular tool and the data infrastructure? The less you can have them working on that, the more you can have them focused on threats and the job you actually hired them to do. I think that's a better approach. And they'll even say you at least require one full-time employee to manage the infrastructure. But as it gets more and more complex, you have to hire additional engineers. with more specialization in different areas, right? So just something to kind of keep in mind when you're comparing sort of a modern cloud SIEM versus some of these legacy approaches. So with Panther, again, we're able to ingest data from pretty much any source. We can bring it in from all the different cloud platforms. I mentioned we have over 100 different integrations. If we don't have one, we can very easily create them. We have an entire team that are focused on that. We're able to then provide visibility, write those detections, and then we can send that to our security data lake. And I put this infinity symbol because it's almost infinite storage. You can just keep throwing as much data at it. And it's, again, highly performant. I've even found it to be easier to search and faster than some other solutions out there that are more specific to a particular vendor like Google or a Microsoft, for example. And then we could do a lot of interesting things with that data too, be able to run fast queries, be able to create dashboards and things like that. And then again, we've actually improved our search experience quite a bit. You don't have to know SQL or any sort of proprietary query language to start looking through your logs. I use this very heavily, our security data lake, in a number of our workshops. The one that we have coming on the 18th is around purple teaming, where I actually run offensive security operations against Okta infrastructure. We then go into our security data lake and we use those logs to develop a hypothesis for writing new detections. And that whole process is incredibly fast. I can go very easily identify what should I have detected. I did something malicious. Oh, here's the log entry. I can copy that, immediately put it into a unit test, and I can write a detection for that in about maybe 15, 20 minutes. And if you don't believe me, sign up for our workshop and I'll show you how we actually do it. It's actually quite a bit of fun. But being able to, do those searches very rapidly, be able to go through and make sense of my data is critically important for use cases around investigations, as well as if you're doing any sort of threat hunting within your organization as well. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about detection. So this is something I kind of prepared a while back, where I was looking at sort of the evolution of detection. And even though I kind of talk about how these sort of increase in complexity, all of these types of detections are leveraged in a SIEM or other security tools. And they all have different uses. One thing I like about this sort of one-dimensional approach is they're very fast. If we're just looking for simple matches, like for an IOC, for example, like an IP address or a username, we can actually do that very rapidly and very quickly. You'll find these types of tools that are used in some of your basic antivirus, for example. And so we also have our sort of two-dimensional approaches as well. This is where we start to bring in more correlation, where we can actually even use regular expressions, more pattern matching, things like that as well. It's not quite as fast as one-dimensional, but it is still incredibly fast, particularly when you're leveraging, like in Python, for example. It's pretty quick. A lot of legacy SIEMs were also leveraging this. I kind of look at ArcSight, which had an incredibly powerful correlation engine, which was great. It kind of fell down when you started trying to do searches again for like threat hunting and things like that. But the correlation engine was incredibly powerful, and that's where I think a lot of SIEM vendors started copying some of that as well. Then we get into multi-dimensional, where we actually start to realize that adversaries were actually circumventing some of our detections. So how do we write better detections that maybe identify sort of unknown threats as well? We start to look more at behavioral types of analytics and not indicators alone. And then we also started to leverage behavior models, risk scoring, and things like that. And now we're actually more in the n-dimensional, where we're actually dealing with higher volumes of log sources. We start to move away from that manual aspects and try to leverage more automation. Machine learning, for example, in some of our detections, you can start using, again, like a risk-based types of scoring as well around some of that to, again, provide more context around that particular alert, and also sequencing them together. So looking at a number of different events that may happen in a pattern that I want to identify, versus individual alerts that may be treated as false positives. So the more we can actually chain those events together, provide more context to the analyst to make sense of it. We're not going to be replacing the security analyst with AI. Like all that kind of stuff is all marketing hoopla, I believe. What we can do is leverage machine learning AI to actually enhance the existing analysts. And that's one thing I really like to see at Panther that we're starting to do, and how we're being very smart about how we leverage some of those technologies into our stack. So how does detection as code work? So again, leveraging sort of more of a developer-centric approach, we actually start writing much more complex queries. I remember when I was at a particular security vendor, and I would write a query and it'd be 200 lines, and I would go through and I'd modify it and I'd break something. Man, I wish I could have been able to roll that back. With detection as code concepts, we can very easily do that. We also apply multiple unit tests in one of our workshops too. I do around with GitHub. I actually have 4 or 5 different unit tests where I test different conditions for different sort of user events. And so I can have sort of one rule to kind of rule them all. And then we have all these different unit tests and even a false positive where I can actually make sure that that rule is functioning. So it's really great approach, and also being able to do workflow actions like in GitHub, integrating with CI/CD pipelines. I think it's also great. I'm seeing a heavier shift more towards this sort of engineering focused aspect for writing detections than ever before. Just again, it increases efficiencies and makes things much easier to roll back and manage, especially if you're dealing with a collaborative team. I think it's a better approach to take. So then we get into sort of our response aspect. So this is where, again, we want to integrate with the ecosystem, not just ingesting all the logs and charging people for all that, right? That's not going to be particularly valuable. We also want to be able to do something with that data. The more we can actually make that data actionable, whether it's through an automated process or providing rich context to the analyst for them to make those decisions, the better off we're going to be, and the faster we're going to be able to respond to those particular threats. Some destinations, that common ones that we run into are with Jira. We can send things to PagerDuty, Slack. I'm a big fan of Tines. I've worked with a lot of SOAR platforms, and Tines has been the easiest one. Like it's almost too easy in some ways. I'm like, I can get myself into trouble, but I really like it. But we also integrate with other SOAR platforms, or you can even do custom webhooks as well, which is another great approach. So if you want to, maybe if you're using Terraform, for example, or other tools to automate your process, you can actually send a webhook to trigger some of those processes. That's something to consider as well. So with Times, for example, if you actually can get their community edition, which is free. I'm actually working on a workshop around this. I'm hoping that we're going to have this available probably around December, January, into the new year. But we'll actually show you how you can send these alerts into Times. They have 3 stories already with Panther. This is just one example of them where you can automatically just add these. And it does a lot of different actions, and you can even indicate, do I want this to, this alert to come back, or do I want to send it into Slack? There's a lot of incredibly powerful things that you can do to automate a lot of those security processes. Again, it may not always be about taking an automated action like blocking an IP address at a firewall or something like that, but it may be something where you're gathering that additional context for the analyst to then make those decisions, and then they can initiate that response through an automated action that they may have to press a button and things like that. That's a very common use case I found with SOAR. Was people thought, oh, SOAR is going to automate the whole security workflow, and it's like, no. Again, it really enabled the analyst and made them more powerful, so they didn't have to go and click a bunch of tools. But it still has to provide information to the analyst, let them make those decisions about what next actions to take. And I kind of like that approach of providing that flexibility. If I'm confident enough in a particular alert that I can actually take those automated actions, that's great. But we also need to realize that sometimes we still need to have an analyst review that before we take any sort of action, particularly if it might pose a risk to the business, like downtime or something like that. And then, of course, we also have our Slack integration, which is really neat, where you can actually send those alerts into Slack. You can even set, assignees. You can take actions. I think it's great being able to ask questions too, like, hey, did you log in? You were here in San Francisco or Portland, and then 20 minutes ago you logged in from Russia and Moscow. Was that you? Being able to take an action, like, no, that wasn't me, and then initiate another action. Again, that relieves a lot of time from the analyst and also provides more context around that alert. Yeah, now this is something I need to pay attention to versus, no, that person's just on vacation, and that's all good. So again, providing that alert where the analysts are, where the security team is working, whether it's Slack, Jira, or other tools, I think is incredibly important. Again, work within the security ecosystem, I believe, is critically important. And then also being able to do custom webhooks, right? So being able to send an alert to any destination, that's really incredibly valuable. I've even experimenting with actually sending some of these alerts into Splunk. We're actually working on a modified version of a webhook that would allow us to do that, where you can actually bring in those high volume log sources into Panther, like CloudTrail, for example, that maybe would be cost prohibitive or have some technical issues in some of these legacy SIEMs. And then we can send that alert directly into Splunk if that's where you already have your security workflow and you're using that like Splunk Enterprise Security as your ticketing system, for example. So again, we can work very well with the legacy SIEMs or other tools. And there may be a situation where you do want to send this to a custom application or a custom script that you may want to execute as well. So again, providing you with that flexibility, maybe even create your own SOAR platform. Basically, you can do that leveraging Panther and the custom webhook. And with that, I'm going to open this up for Q&A. I see we do have a couple of questions that popped up in the chat as I was talking, so I'll try to address those real quickly here. From Jean Francois, I'm wondering if Panther is a SIEM by itself or it's a SIEM aggregator, and the answer is yes. It can actually be both. It really depends. I know people hate that answer, but that really is the truth. When it comes to this, you can actually leverage Panther as your SIEM, particularly if you're a very distributed organization, you have most of your assets in the cloud. We can deal with on-prem, really depending on your architecture. We can bring data from on-prem environments fine. We don't work in air-gapped environments, of course, because we are a cloud-native SIEM, but that's, those use cases are few and far between. But we are also being sort of a front end for some of these legacy SIEMs as well. So again, we are finding that people don't have visibility into a lot of their cloud infrastructure because they're not bringing those logs in because it is so dang expensive. They also have to maybe re-architect, those buckets I was talking about to be able to handle the volume of data that they're dealing with. By bringing that data into Panther, you have it searchable within the security data lake. You can even use things like Splunk's DB Connect if you want to query that data from within Splunk, if that's what you want to do. Or we also can just send alerts from Panther and directly into Splunk, again, part of your security workflow. We are working on other SIEM vendors as well, like Elastic or Ardivo. Again, a lot of organizations have invested a lot of money into these SIEMs, and we know that. But we are also finding that they don't want to put a lot more money. They don't want to increase their license. If they put 10x more data into this legacy SIEM, are they getting 10x the value? Not necessarily, right? If they're able to bring that data into Panther and save quite a bit of money, they're able to maybe have their DevOps folks as well writing more robust detections in Python that are more real-time focused. They're also able to integrate those alerts with automation processes as well. And then maybe based on severity or the log source or the event type, they can send that data into a Splunk or wherever they have their ticketing system. I think that provides more flexibility. And again, we're working more within the security ecosystem and meeting folks where they are. So I hope that answered the question. Great. If you guys have any other questions here, feel free to put it in the webinar chat. We also have a Q&A here. I don't see anything there. But yeah, if there's any additional questions, feel free to reach out. No worries if not. We do have our hands-on workshops. I recommend going to panther.com. We have new workshops being added every month. We have a purple teaming workshop that we've been doing that's been really popular. We've even been delivering that at B-Sides, and people really love it. Even if you don't use Panther, you'll still learn a little bit about Python, about how to use some of these purple teaming techniques and tools as well in the security data lake and leveraging some offensive security tools to test some of your detections. I also have another one around code to cloud, where we're looking at more how a lot of SIEMs are sort of shifting left, where they're actually bringing in non-traditional log sources like GitHub and things from their other sort of development types of environments. And so we do a workshop around that, about what you may want to look for in GitHub, as well as in maybe your CloudTrail logs from this sort of code to cloud approach. We are working on another one for our Times integration. So if you want to learn more about SOAR, we'll be doing that. Those are 2 hours. We are hands-on. We do, you will need a laptop. Yeah, we do those virtually. If you are interested in doing a private workshop as well with your team, we're more than happy to do that. Just reach out to me. My email is ken@panther.com or your sales rep. I'm more than happy to get that organized. But looks like we don't have any additional questions. But thank you all for taking the time to learn with me today. I hope you got some value out of this. Again, feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions. My email's real simple, ken@panther.com. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye, and you guys have a great day.